So, welcome back. Now, what is it you look for in a medical paper to decide, well, is this a real quality paper that should influence me in some way or other? What do I look for in a medical paper that I'm reviewing to see if I would recommend it for publication in a journal? But when I do that, the last thing I'm really looking at is the particulars of the statistical tests that are being done. I look for several things first, which I would think are some of the things you would look for also. First and foremost, I look for the sample size. Now, if the sample size is extremely large, I know right up front that most of the hypothesis tests are going to be highly significant, or in other words, most of the p-value is going to be very, very small. But if the sample size is small, I know that most of the p-values will be large, and I won't really have learned very much in the study. I think one of the reasons some studies fail, maybe a lot of studies fail, even randomized clinical trials, is they don't produce the results that the authors were hoping for because the sample size turned out to be too small. Maybe the patients didn't like going into that particular study and you didn't reach the sample size you were expecting to reach. Well, what's a reasonable sample size? Well, a well-known statistician, Nathan Mantell, a long time ago would say, oh, 75 in a group. Well, where's that come from? Well, 75 in a group, if the outcome variable is dichotomous, as in these examples we've been looking at, and the summary statistic is a proportion, 75 in a group will give you 80% power, talked about that last time, for detecting a difference of about 20 percentage points in the summary statistics. So if you want to detect if you're having 50% good high quality results versus 70%, then 75 in a group would be a reasonable number. Now, if you're dealing with a continuous outcome, you probably need fewer than that. However, sometimes the percentage outcome you're looking for, maybe you want to compare the complications or side effects of something to treatments, and the side effect percentage is very small, like 1%. Well, then you may very well need a huge sample size to be able to distinguish those things. Secondly, I would look for exactly who are the patients, and maybe this should be primary in your mind. Are these patients they're talking about the kind of patients you're treating, the kind of patients you're seeing in your clinic? So I look for a table that describes the patients in terms of summary statistics for the various groups you're comparing. I don't care if the p-value is significant or not. I want to know, what's the average or what's the percent in each of the groups. Another thing you should be looking for is whatever the etiology situation is you're studying, is there a wide spectrum of the severity of the disease, let's say? Because if there isn't, you may be not looking at a situation where you'll be able to find if there are differences, because frequently there are interactions going on and patients will respond differently to different treatments depending on whether you have a less severely ill person versus a bit more severely ill person. If you'd like to know if this is more of a fishing expedition paper or if it's a clinical study that was designed from the beginning, then you should look to see if there was a reasonable question posed and are there reasonable hypotheses that are actually addressed in the paper themselves. You may start with a randomized clinical trial and you answered the primary question, but now you're asking secondary and tertiary questions, and the hypotheses may not have been thought of ahead of time, and the value of the secondary and tertiary questions may not be a whole lot better than maybe even some retrospective studies you might be doing. Finally, you're looking for bias. And I think the most important thing to look for is the patient flow into the study, both from the point of view of the various treatments being compared, but also from the point of view, are these results going to be generalizable to a much larger population in the future? We want to see how did the patients actually get into the study to the point where they were actually measured and measured at the final time. There's a consort statement talks about the patient flow, and I think every paper should tell us, how many patients were available potentially to get into your study? How many of those patients did you actually ask to see if they could participate? How many of those patients actually said yes versus no, I won't participate? How many of the ones who said yes and you actually entered into this study actually were measured at the final follow-up. Extremely important issues for trying to determine if there may be some selectivity going on so that your results, maybe the results are fair in terms of the comparability of the treatments being compared, but they will lead to results that will not be very well generalized to the general population.